All right, everybody, we're back. This is our second installment of the video series on Matthew. Today we're going to look at Matthew chapter 2. Not sure if we're going to get completely finished with Matthew chapter 2 or not. There's a lot of stuff packed in there that we're going to try to unpack and talk about. So we'll see how far we get in our 15-minute time period. So let's don't waste any time. Let's get right straight to it. Let's go to Matthew chapter 2 and start in verse 1. As Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east and have come to worship him." So here's where we're going to start, because NIV says Magi from the east, NASB says Magi from the east, and King James says wise men from the east. The terminology here that we want to take apart is right here, and that is Magi or Magos. Okay, they are astrologers, they are magicians, sorcerers, wizards, we would say. They were in part wise men, but they were wise men in terms of astrology. They were wise men in terms of understanding what was going on by the stars. So what was happening here is these men in the east, these wise men in the east, nobody really knows exactly where they came from. There's been a lot of speculation, but that's all it is opinion and conjecture. What we do know is these were men that were very, very familiar with the stars. So that being familiar with the stars, they would have understood what the star of Christ meant at the birth, because they would have been familiar with different religious texts. If they would have been wise men in their own kingdoms, they would have been familiar with these things. So when they saw the star, they understood what the star meant, and they knew that that meant Jesus. They didn't know necessarily his name was Jesus, but they knew that that meant the prophecies of the Old Testament scriptures of Christ were that there was going to be a son who was going to be born King of the Jews. Okay, they would have understood the scriptures, and they set out on their journey to pay homage. So what we have at this point is that they get here it says, as Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east." Again, we've talked about this. Interpretation. Going from Greek to English, we translated it, saw his star in the east. A more accurate translation is that we saw his star at the rising, when it rose. We saw his star the day the star was able to be seen. In other words, when did we see his star? We saw it at the birth. We saw his star at the birth. So, they set out on their journey. Now, I told y'all at the end of chapter 1 of Matthew that we were going to burst some bubbles here. And I told y'all then that the spoiler alert there was that the Magi were not at the manger. They didn't come to the manger. And they didn't come to the manger. And I'm fixing to show you that in Scripture. They came instead to Jesus' family's house. And we'll see that here in a few verses. Why does that matter? Well, it matters because popular opinion and societal cultures and norms and traditions and fairy tales and mythology shouldn't be what determines what we believe. It should be based entirely in Scripture and in truth. So they saw the star when it rose. When did it rise? It rose at the birth. So at that point in time, they would have begun preparation to make their journey to come and pay their reverence and homage to this King of the Jews. And they said it. Where is the one who's been born King of the Jews? Now, an interesting thing happens here in verse 3. When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed. Well, I'm sure that he was disturbed. The word is tereso. Well, let's see. Let me back up. Because he says, when we saw a star in the east, we've come to worship him. So let's back up to the last part of verse 2. Because that's an interesting word there, worship. To do reverence to is what the word means. To go down on my knees is what the word is interpreted. To worship, quite literally, to kiss the ground. Okay, and this word obeisance is a good word. It means to submit. Now, why does this matter? These men would not have been at liberty to submit to anyone other than their king, okay, their own king. So to recognize this king of the Jews would have been to understand that he was not only king of the Jews, but understood the prophecy that this was actually King of kings and Lord of lords. So this would have been one that they would have been going and recognizing with their king's blessing to go and pay homage to this King of kings and Lord of lords. King of kings. So they would have been kissing the ground. They would have been submitting themselves completely to this in worship. It's a big deal. That's an important point. All right, so now we skip ahead to verse 3. Sorry about that. So it says that King Herod heard this, he was disturbed. The word is tereso. It means he was stirred up and agitated. Well, why? Why was King Herod stirred up and agitated? Pretty simple. King Herod, the providential ruler of this at this time, were just told that the king of the Jews had been born. King Herod was the providential ruler of the Jews. So for him to just find out that the king of the Jews had been born, you can't have two kings. So Herod had a major problem. He had just been told that the king of the Jews, the one he was ruling over, people he was ruling over, the king of the Jews had just been born. Not good. So let's see what he does. Verse 4. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Christ was to be born. You can see he's already starting to plot. Verse 5, in Bethlehem in Judea, they replied, for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will be the shepherd of my people Israel. So they're telling King Herod this. They're explaining to him the prophecy. So what he does is he calls back the Magi. So verse 7, then Herod called the Magi secretly, not out in front of everybody, secretly, which is your first clue right there, secretly, and found out from them, this is important, I hope you're listening, the exact time the star had appeared. Why does that matter? Because common nomenclature is that the Magi went to visit Jesus in the manger. They didn't. In all likelihood, Jesus was 18 to 24 months old when they came to his house to present their gifts and worship him. Why does that matter? Because it matters. Because if the truth will set you free, then false teaching puts you into bondage. Remember that. Simple point. So Herod wanted to know from the Magi, hey guys, tell me exactly when you saw the star rise. Exactly, what was the exact time? The word is chronos, it's time. When exactly did you see this star? So they tell him. Okay, now, verse 8. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, go and make a careful search for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me so that I too may go and worship him. No, baloney. He had other ideas. Verse 9, after they had heard the king, they went on their way. Now, from Jerusalem to Bethlehem is quite a journey here, guys. It's about 5 miles. Okay, so let's just say they're on foot. 5 miles would have taken them about 2 hours to get there, a little less. Okay, but you've got some different ideas about what the Magi did, who they were, how many were there. If I asked you right now, how many Magi came to Jesus' home, what are you going to say? 3. We're going to get into that in just a second. We don't know if there were 3 or 300. We have no idea how many there were. We base that, well, I don't want to give it away, so we'll wait. So he says, verse 9, after they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen in the east, or had seen at the rising, went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. Now this is interesting. This is a very cool star, okay? Because you got to recognize, first of all, that this star was noticeable and distinct and came suddenly. So Jesus is born, boom, here's this star. If you know anything about stars in a scientific standpoint don't do that, okay? The other thing this star does is it moves. it moves and directs the Magi to Jesus. Okay? So, my question I've always had is this star, it says, went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. So my question has always been, how were the Magi able to determine the star was over this exact house? So by all intentional purposes here, we are dealing with something that is completely and totally created, completely and totally supernatural. This is a God thing. This is not a natural thing. Okay? This is very much supernatural. So verse 10, when they saw the star, that it had stopped, they were overjoyed. Now pay attention, verse 11. On coming to the manger? No. On coming to the house. House. Oikia. Okay? House. An inhabited edifice. The other translation, the way we would say it today, is it's where their stuff was. Okay? Their properties, their goods, their possessions. It's where their stuff was. They came to his house, not to the manger. So for the love of all that is good and holy, please take the wise men out of the manger. They don't belong there in your nativity scene when you set it out for Christmas. The wise men, the Magi, do not belong there. Take them out. Let them come along a long time later. Okay, so on coming to the house, verse 11, they saw the child, not the baby, the child, and that's a distinction in terminology, with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. So here we are. If I asked you, like I said a second ago, how many wise men, how many Magi came to Jesus, you would say 3. Do you know why we say 3? Because it's based on their gifts. Then they opened their treasures and presented to him with gifts of gold and of frankincense and myrrh. So people have deduced over the years 3 gifts, 3 kings. They weren't kings. They were kingly representatives. They were wise men. They were Magi. They were astrologers. But they weren't kings. Okay? Nothing in Scripture says kings. They could have been kings' representatives, but not kings themselves. So, they opened their gifts, opened their treasures, and presented him with gifts of gold and of incense and of myrrh. Now, why do I say to you that there could have been 3 Magi or there could have been 300 Magi? I'm going to take you to 2 places in the Old Testament, okay? And I want you to see here, and this is going to be 2 Kings 5, 4 through 6, and 2 Kings 8, 7 through 9. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to read them to you very quickly because we are running out of time. We're definitely not going to get finished with chapter 2 today. We'll probably get to verse 12. But I want you to see this place in 2 Kings because these are kingly representatives that are going not just to another king to present him with gifts. They are going to what they would have understood would have been the King of Kings. Okay? King of Kings and Lord of Lords. They would have known the Scriptures. They would have understood the Scriptures. They would have understood what the Scriptures said about that star. Because otherwise they would have just been on a blind journey. Hey, we see a star. Let's go see what that star means. They wouldn't have known to bring gifts. They wouldn't have known to see. They understood the Scriptures. We know those things by process of elimination. So, look at 2 Kings 5. It is a very interesting thing because in 2 Kings 5, and I'm not going to get into the background of it, the backstory, I want you to go back and read 2 Kings 5. What I'm going to tell you is this was a place where in 2 Kings 5, the commander of the king's army, the commander of the king of Aram, okay, his name was Naaman. Naaman was the commander of the king's army, the general, we would say. Naaman was a valiant soldier, but he had leprosy, it says. So, in the process, it says in verse 4, we're going to pick up, Naaman went to his master and told him what the girl from Israel had said. By all means, go, the king of Aram replied. I will send a letter to the king of Israel. So, the king of Aram sending a letter to the king of Israel, and what are they asking? They're asking to heal Naaman of his leprosy. Okay, so one king writing a letter to another king, hey man, will you heal my general? That's what we got going on here. So He says in verse 5, "By all means go," the king of Aram replied. "I will send a letter to the king of Israel." So Naaman left, taking with him gifts. So one king to another king. Okay? Gifts. And what gifts did he send him? You got this picture, guys, that that when Jesus was visited by these three men, that you've got these teeny tiny little bowls, and you've got a little bowl of incense, and you've got a little bowl of myrrh, and you've got a little bowl of gold. I'm just going to say it like this. That is probably completely, totally, 100% wrong. And I'll show you why. The king of Aram sends a letter to the king of Israel, asking the king of Israel, "Will you please heal, have your prophet heal my commander, my commanding general of my army?" What does he send with him? Naaman left, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 sets of clothes. The letter that he took to the king of Israel read, "With this letter I'm sending you my servant to Naaman, sending my servant Naaman to you so that you may cure him of his leprosy." Here's what that actually means, though, because we don't keep up much on talents. That's 750 pounds of silver, 150 pounds of gold, and 10 sets of royal garments. That's just one king to another king. "Will you do me a favor? Heal my general." 750 pounds of silver, 150 pounds of gold, 10 sets of royal garments. These guys were coming to see the King of Kings. Does it make sense that they're bringing a little tiny bowl of incense, a little tiny bowl of myrrh, a little tiny bowl of gold? No. Baloney. Does the Bible say it? No. Maybe it was 3 little bowls. Maybe it was 3 little men. But chances are it wasn't. Look at 2 Kings. Ooh, we're already past our time. We're going to have to hurry. 2 Kings chapter 8 and verse 7. Here we see Ben-Hadad. Ben-Hadad was king of Aram. So Elisha went to Damascus, Elisha, prophet, went to Damascus, and Ben-Hadad, king of Aram, was ill. So the king of Aram was sick. When the king was told the man of God has come all the way up here, he said to Hazael, "Take a gift with you," singular, "take a gift with you, and go to meet the man of God," Elisha we're talking about. "Consult the Lord through him and ask, will I recover from this illness?" So go see Elisha, okay? King of Aram says, go see Elisha. King is sick. Consult him. Ask the Lord through the prophet, am I going to recover from this illness? And take him a gift. Hazael went to meet Elisha, taking with him as a gift 40 camel loads of all the finest wares of Damascus. So in Scripture, a gift doesn't mean one teeny tiny bowl of gold, one teeny tiny cup of frankincense, one teeny tiny bowl of myrrh. A gift in context, this is from the king to the prophet, asking him to ask God just this: am I going to get well? And what did he send him as a gift? 40 camel loads of all the finest wares of Damascus. Guys, in all likelihood, what we've been believing about the 3 wise men and the 3 bowls of this and the teeny tiny this, and these guys were going to see the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. Chances are very good this wasn't 3 men, but a caravan. That's why it took so long to get there. Well, we're way over our time. Finish verse 12. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. Hope you've enjoyed this lesson on the wise men. 750 pounds of silver, 150 pounds of gold, 10 sets of royal garments, and in another instance, king to prophet, 40 camel loads of gifts. These guys weren't going to see king to king. They were going to pay homage and worship, bow down and submit themselves in reverence, kissing the ground in front of the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. What do you think that picture looked like? Till next time, we'll see you.